but we're going to start with this question first. So this is from 2014, which is a while ago. How old were you guys in 2014?
6.
6? Damn, that's wild. That's wild. Okay. All right. So firstly, we're going to look at our data. Can someone tell me what's going on with the data in the last column? Yes, Aiden?
Like the average isn't correct and 12 wasn't an outlier.
Yep, right. So all the data consistent until you get to this thing. This is a huge outlier, and you can tell that they've calculated the average and disregarded the number 311, right? Because if I were to calculate the average of these four, my number would be quite a bit higher. I haven't actually figured it out, but I'm sure it'll be higher, right? Just by looking at the numbers. So that tells me that they've removed it. So the first question here, you don't actually need any understanding of the content. You just answer it based on what you see in the table. But it's also 2 marks. So I'm just going to scaffold it here. So account for the student's calculated average time for 300 bubbles of CO2. For 1 mark, I just want to say that they treated 311 as an outlier. Right. Now, if I've just stated that the 311 is treated as an outlier, what do I need to say to get my 2nd mark? Okay, I'm getting a few things. Calculate the whole thing. No, you don't do that. How do I account for something? Or I don't like their wording. The word account is strange. I think a better word would be like explain why. So I'm just going to explain why they excluded the number 311. Right. So we just identified that 311 is an outlier, but we've got to say why it is an outlier. So I'm going to say why is it an outlier? Well, it's really different to the other values. Right. 311 is significantly different to the other values. 199, 200, and 210. Right. You can also say this doesn't fall within the trend of results for that volume. It's up to you how specific you are, but I'll write that too. All right, cool. All right, let's do B now. Explain the results of the experiment. Now, my necessary verb is explain here. I'm just going to highlight it. What do we do when there's an explain question? Yeah, cause and effect, right? So we got to just say what the results of this experiment are. So what's the general trend we notice in this experiment? Yeah?
The more CO2 that is added, the lower average time.
Yep, so the more CO2 bubbles there are, the lower time it takes for the milk to curdle in seconds. And I also gave you a hint here. So CO2 increases acidity of the solution. Have we learned that in chem yet? No? Actually, I don't even know if you learned it in chem. But basically what this is telling you is as my volume of CO2 is increasing, my pH is decreasing, right? Because the acidity is getting higher and higher. And we know that enzymes have an operating window that they like to be in. right? So can someone tell me how, or can someone tell me why the effect, right, or the cause, I would say, why the milk is curdling faster as the pH decreases? Yes, Taylor?
The stomach usually has a more acidic environment, so as the pH becomes more acidic, then it becomes closer to the right conditions, so it'll be more efficient.
Yep. That's good. So I'm just going to write that for the first few marks. So I'm just going to identify my general trend here as CO2 increases, curdling time decreases. And then I'm going to say why. This is because CO2 increases acidity of solution, putting the enzyme in its optimal range. Right, but there's actually one more trend you need to account for, because technically this isn't quite enough for 2 marks, or for 4 marks I mean. And to figure that out, you have to look at the trend again carefully. Can we see what's happening with our trend? Like, can someone describe it to me?
Slowing down.
Yeah, it's slowing down, right? Exactly, right? So it's the time taken decreases by 20 seconds each time as you're going up, but then for the last 2, it slows down by a lot, right? It barely changes from 250 to 300 bubbles of CO2. And what does that tell us about our graph? Yeah, probably, right? Yeah. Now, we know that a pH curve generally looks a bit like a parabola, an upside down parabola, a bell curve, right? So it should look a bit like this, right? Any pH curve, right, of an enzyme. So if I'm going to match that to my CO2 here, that probably tells me that I'm reaching peak efficiency around this mark, right? So around here, I'm at peak efficiency, and I'm just scaling up towards that point, right? So what this also tells me is if I were to continue the table and go down further, my efficiency would start to fall off, right? Because I'm kind of entering the most efficient zone of my pH scale, right? Just remembering this is the general pH curve, right? Because we have to remember the different types of curves for enzyme efficiencies, right? So I'm going to actually write that as well in my response, because I have to mention all the changes I see in the trend. So I might just say from 100 to 200 CO2 bubbles, trend sharply increases, but slows down. And I have to say why, because peak pH enzyme efficiency is reached. I might just use the word optimum, that's better. Right. Now, the important thing I want to highlight here, yes, Taylor?
Is it enzyme efficiency or is it the rate of saturation?
Rate of saturation has to do with increasing the volume of the solute, which is a different type of graph.
So it's the enzyme efficiency.
Yeah, with pH. You're thinking about solute concentration, which is a different curve. Yeah. That's more of an exponential curve. So I was talking to Miss Zhu about how her year 12s were answering their biology responses. And then she was telling me how they would forget to talk about the syllabus when given a stimulus sheet, right? So the stimulus here is the table. And what she found out was that all the year 12s were pretty good at referencing the general trend, but they A, weren't specific enough, and B, didn't link the trend back to what they understood about the syllabus, right? So what I mean by that is, I'm just going to get my highlighter out. We should be referencing trends numerically, right? So can you see here how in my response I reference all the numbers when possible, right? That's the first thing you should do in your responses is reference numbers. It's actually been a marking criteria in the investigating science exams recently, where if you don't mention a number from the graph or the table, they don't give you the mark, right? So we've got to start to do that now in all our science responses. Huh?
At least one.
Yeah, you have to reference the number, otherwise they don't say you've accounted the trend properly. Yeah. You can't just describe the shape, you got to say the number, right? That's the first thing. The second thing is, I'm just going to highlight this. My last sentence, I've explained the trend with my knowledge of the syllabus, right? And we've got to make sure we do that too in our responses.